Welcome, everybody. This is the Soapbox Hero, and I have my good friend, Richard Wagner. He is a California school teacher of 30 years, coach, and freelance writer. Thank you so much for being here, Richard.
Thank you for having me, Ian. Good seeing you again.
So, you are in California during this wonderful crisis.
All right.
How are you specifically doing, and how are things going out there?
Well, in my own specific situation, everything is great. I mean, I have a job where they're still paying me. Teaching high school, we're doing it distance learning. Most of my kids that were working before are still working. So it's not like the grades are dropping compared to what they were before. And I was actually kind of impressed with that. I'm trying to make my lessons as simple as possible because I know the kids can be going through a lot of stress and I don't want to add to the stress. So I'm trying to make things easy.
Right.
As far as the radio column that I write goes, there are still stories. I'm trying to stay on the positive because so many of the larger companies are really going through hard times, and there's a lot of cutbacks in the industry. Advertising is down, listenership is down, so there's a lot of negatives too. So I'm trying to stay on the positive side with that. But I look around and I see what's happening, and at times it gets a little depressing. So I have to kind of remind myself that, hopefully things will be turning around soon.
Yeah, definitely. So the radio, how is everything going with that? I mean, radio, how is it still alive at this point? I mean, how many people are really listening to the radio?
That's a good question. And in my last column, I actually mentioned that there are some stations in Los Angeles that have half the number of listeners they had 2 months ago. And
Sure.
Nielsen rates that they actually keep track of the cumulative number of listeners that tune into a station during a specified time. And usually it's done by the week or the month. But regardless, they're like Coast 103 actually had a drop of truly half of their listenership. The ratings were still decent, but they were overtaken by, of all stations, an AM station, KFI. And it's not really because everyone's flocking to KFI, it's because they didn't lose as many listeners. So since the rating itself is based off a percentage of listeners tuned into a station between the hours of 6 a.m. and midnight, since there's fewer listeners, but KFI lost fewer, they
Right.
actually ended up being higher. So they're the #1 station in town right now. It's kind of funny.
Interesting.
But think
Yeah,
about
but
it.
I mean,
You've lost in-car listening.
right,
You've
driving to and
lost,
from work.
right. You've lost in-store listening, kind of the captive audience, in-store and in-work listening, where you weren't really listening, but the little meters picked up that you were listening
Right.
to it. So one of the things I argue in the column is that the stations that didn't drop as much can actually go to advertisers later and say, hey, people choose to listen to us. They don't just listen because it's on where they go. They're actually
Right.
active listening. And if you're an advertiser, that's the type of station you want.
Right.
So
Right.
it could be very well that in spite of there not being a lot of cowboys in Southern California, it could be that Go Country ends up being one of the stations that the advertisers really stay with. And KFI has always been one they stay with. So it's kind of interesting. But the losers, and you're going to, you came from here too. The station that really dropped and surprisingly dropped was K-Rock. They're
Right.
down to the lowest rating since I've been writing the column, and I've been writing it since 1987. I think that the ratings are lower than they've been since the station launched.
Wow. I mean, it's not necessarily their individual fault. I mean, they've all been playing the same tired game for a very long
Oh,
time of jamming the same 50 to 60 songs down your throat all day,
I was
every
always
day. No independent
surprised.
artists.
I was always surprised tuning in, and I would hear, I'm tuning into K-Rock because I want to hear new music, right?
Right.
Why am I hearing 5-year-old Blink 182 songs? And surrounded by commercials and things like that.
Right.
So, it could be that what they're doing is something they have to go through. Things have to reinvent themselves, and maybe losing Kevin and Bean and starting over from ground up. This may actually make K-Rock better. Of course, they're owned by Entercom, so I don't really think so.
I actually grew up on Kevin and Bean. Their Christmas cassette
Oh
tapes.
yeah,
Those specials were that's what made me want. I always wanted to get into the radio field. I guess this is as close as I'm going to get since
yeah.
radio's.
Well,
I
you're
mean,
lucky. You don't want to be in the industry.
yeah, I don't want to be in the industry now. Definitely, it's the worst time
Yeah,
to be in the industry. But yeah, I mean, it's really sad. It every time I think about the radio, it makes me sad. I mean, it used to be such an amazing resource and a place where you could get honest, you know, information, and especially now more than ever, we could really use like a radio DJ that, a radio personality that the people could relate to and, call in and, relieve some
yeah.
stress or
Radio is your
whatnot.
friend. When I
Right,
was growing up, radio is your friend. Radio and music is what made me feel good. And
right.
I have great memories of listening to the various stations that I grew up with. Some before your time, some at the same time. But the old KHJs, the KZYs, the KISS FMs, and the KMETs, and all those were amazing stations with some great DJs. And you really, if they did it right, and most of the time they did, they were talking to you. They weren't
Right.
talking to a million people at once. They were talking to you.
Right, and you'd get some exclusive music. You'd get the newest track, or you'd get a
Right,
new artist you'd never heard of,
right,
and then it all just kind of went downhill. And then they also on the other side, people like Opie and Anthony. I mean, your shock jocks, right? Like
right.
that's an Howard Stern, like those types of things where they're just doing wild things in the studio. That started getting cracked down on when it all got so corporate and it wasn't individual stations making their own decisions anymore.
Right.
It was, well, now the man says, that's not PC, or this, our
Well, yeah, and when they started syndicating,
advertisers aren't going to like this. Right.
think about the idea that, hey, it may be okay to say something in Los Angeles, but if that show is being syndicated somewhere in Iowa, does it meet community standards in both places? So
Hmm.
that's a problem too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just got too big, right? I mean,
Yeah,
Clear Channel and iHeart, that whole situation. For
yep.
those that don't know, can you walk through your understanding or your recollection of the Clear Channel iHeart takeover and destruction of radio?
Well,
If that's
what
an accurate.
basically happened is sometime in the 80s they started loosening regulations, and then I want to say it was right around 92 where they took off the limits totally. It used to be in the old days that you could not own more than 7 stations, radio or TV, in the entire country.
Wow.
And you could affiliate, like NBC, ABC had a lot of affiliates, but they couldn't
Hmm.
own more than that number of stations. And you couldn't own more than one AM, one FM, and one TV in one particular market either. So there's a
Sounds like a
lot of
great idea.
competition. Well, it made for a lot of
Sounds,
competition.
yeah, sounds beautiful.
You had to compete. And then if you were a DJ, think of this idea. You get fired from one place. Well, the next station wants you because you have the image, and you can
Right.
go on, and there's a lot of creativity. You're always competing. And then what happened is, for some reason, the FCC and Congress was convinced that radio was in a downfall because of alternative media. So you needed to have strength in numbers, and you know how well, what do you call them, when you dominate an industry, when you have a
Hmm.
what's the word I'm searching
A
for?
monopoly.
Monopoly. Thank you. When you have a monopoly, that always works so well.
Oh, every time. Yeah, it's never gone wrong.
So basically, they said, hey, if we can own more stations, we can save costs, and we can do this, and we can do that. Well, so they ended up buying these stations, and the station prices shot up.
Hmm.
But they overpaid then, and then they couldn't service the debt. And a lot of the cost savings that they were expecting in management didn't happen
Hmm.
because they still needed to have a lot of these positions. You couldn't have, well, successfully anyway, in my opinion, one manager overseeing 3 or 4 stations, because
Hmm.
then they can't give their attention to it, and then mediocrity ends up ruling the airways. Well,
Sure.
that's what they did.
Hmm.
So they have all these stations that basically sound the same. If you're in Los Angeles, what's the difference between KBIG and KOST? I'd be hard pressed to tell. Well, now there's a little bit of difference, but what's the difference between KBIG and KISS FM?
Hmm.
There's so much overlap, and they're all co-owned, so they don't really care if a listener goes from one station to the other.
Right.
But what they did ultimately was made people find other alternatives. So that's where Spotify came in. That's where Apple Music came in. It even helped, if you remember the early days of satellite radio, that was going to be a failure because
Right.
who's going to pay for radio?
Yeah.
Well, they made radio so intolerable by the repetitiveness, the lack of creativity, the extra commercials to pay for your,
Hmm.
your debt load, and they basically forced listeners away. And then they, with the extra commercials and taking away the creative DJs, they made radio a background activity instead of a foreground activity, like we were talking
Hmm.
about before. When in my
Right.
day, you that was your friend. Well,
Right.
now it's just a music machine with commercials. So advertisers said, well, I'm not going to pay much for that. So the ad rates dropped. The whole thing basically collapsed. So the model was never all that great to begin with, but it really kind of became a vicious cycle of going down the tubes. So now a lot of these companies are stuck with stations that they can't afford to run. And
Hmm.
Clear Channel, which became iHeart, at one time owned, I want to say something like 1,400 stations. They're down to about 700 now. But
Hmm.
you have iHeart, you have Entercom, which merged with CBS. CBS at one time was a stellar company. Well, Entercom screwed them up. And Cumulus, which has been kind of on a death spiral for years.
Hmm.
Those are the major companies. Interestingly, there are some good companies, and Bonneville, which is based out of Salt Lake City, it's actually owned by the Mormon Church. They let their stations run well. They don't go in and say you have to do things to try to match a certain market. Their whole philosophy is, what can you do to entertain our listeners?
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of cool. They don't have any specific needs for, they're not in debt like the other networks are. So there are some good companies around, and I'm hoping that they don't get pulled under by the big ones. But I'd love to see the big ones go away because I want to have independent radio come back.
Oh, absolutely. Is that how we save radio? I mean, how do we save radio? I mean, it
Well,
seems like it's certainly not going in the direction of it resurging.
I think it's going to reinvent itself again. And I think it has to. I think what happened was a big mistake. It's not something that can keep going. I think the companies are fooling themselves thinking they're going to work their way out of this with cost cutting. And I do think eventually you're going to see radio come up with something new, just like they did back in the 40s, 50s when shows started moving to television,
Hmm.
just like they did when a lot of the music became kind of an underground thing and the FM stations started blowing up big. I think there will be a renaissance. I don't know how long it will take, but in a weird way, I think what they're going through is good. It has to run its cycle.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder if I feel like there's a couple of different, potential scenarios that we could see, but on one hand, I can see radio becoming like the vinyl of music where like, well, I'm a hipster, so I'm going to get the record player and I'm going to buy the vinyl because I
Right.
remember how good it was, and this is brings back memories, so it can be the throwback way to get things, or potentially like a bunch of really small pop-up stations where they're just completely independent and just trying to start from the ground up, like taking a
Yeah.
podcast and basically putting it up on the airwaves and letting people listen to it if they want to.
That actually is one of the things people talk about is having kind of a podcast radio, which isn't on demand. And I know a lot of on demand things going on, but if you
Hmm.
make it intriguing, I think people will tune in. I was actually thinking for if I were a music station and if I wanted to take over a music station, my this will sound so stupid because I know I'm of the age where AM radio isn't even relevant anymore. I would love to
Right.
do this to an AM station just to show that I think it would work. You find out what kids like listening to. And you don't want to go after my age because the
Right.
the lifeblood of radio are the people that aren't even listening right now. My
Right.
own don't listen to the radio. They're on Spotify, they're on Apple Music, they're on YouTube, whatever. They're going there because they are desperate for new music.
Hmm.
I would go to every high school, every middle school even, and every event that attracts young people. Of course, now they're home. because of COVID. But once this is done, go to clubs, go to places, find out what they're listening to. Go to Spotify, find out what the top requests are of music for and what the kids are listening to. Start making your format based off of that. You break the music before anyone else does. You get the new bands in there before anyone else does. You go to your advertisers and say, hey, we're going to highlight you. We're going to have no more than 7 or 8 minutes of commercials per hour. And I know it sounds like a lot, but there's some stations right now that are running up to 20. So
Right.
you're basically cutting your load down to way less than before, and you don't have long breaks. You always have a thing where you're back to the music faster. So no more than 1 to 2 minutes of commercial, because people will tolerate that. They don't want to listen through 8 minutes, but once they
Right.
realize that, by the time they change the station, you're done with your commercial.
Hmm.
And then you get out in the community, you make the station be part of you, and hire some kids to be DJs, either on a permanent basis or on a rotating basis. This is what stations used to do. It's not like we don't know what works. We know what works. If you had a popular high school kid on Saturday nights, no one's listening to the radio on Saturday nights. They're going to start this thing. It's going to build on itself. And you just market the thing so that it works. I can't see how this wouldn't work. You're appealing to people. You would get the music on before any other source would get it on. They wouldn't go to Spotify. And who wants to pay for stuff? I guess Spotify does have their free version too, but
Hmm.
it's still more work than turning on the radio. You make that station your lifestyle, and I don't see how it could miss. I just need to buy a
Yeah.
station.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's all that's keeping you. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I could definitely see that working as long as you get the right personalities in there that are,
Yeah.
already local leaders or local, somebody that's going to bring in that loyal listener
and,
base.
and treat the listeners with respect.
Right.
Don't talk down to them. Operate on their lifestyle. Keep it all professional, but if there's some event that's coming up, just to give you an idea, this is a little bit before your time, but back in the days of KMET being really big, and they had Paraquat Pat Kelly, he got the name. He never smoked pot himself.
Hmm.
He was started reporting on the Paraquat uh, when they'd spray the marijuana crops to try to kill it off, but it didn't always kill it off. So people were actually smoking pot that was laced with paraquat, and it was causing health issues. They were reporting on that. They were getting that out. They knew their audience. They knew
Hmm.
half their audience was stoners or
Right.
wannabe stoners, whatever, and no one's judging here that that's the way it was.
Right.
And they had this bind with their audience that was huge, and no other station was doing that. And it sounds really stupid, but that was the bond, and that was one of the things they did. KMET News was amazing because this is during a time where no one wanted news, but people would tune in to hear the news on KMET. What did you hear? You heard that. You heard what was going on with wars or whatever, things that would affect kids, and it works. It's amazing what happens when you treat your audience with respect.
Yeah, I feel like at this point we would need like a no COVID news. Like, let's just not talk about COVID-19 for a minute because the world is
Yeah,
still turning and there are still other things going on that people need to know about. But
right.
all we hear about and all that's being told to the people right now is COVID stuff. And I
And
can't
you're only hearing the
imagine.
bad things of COVID too.
Right, right,
Not that
exactly.
there's a lot of good things of COVID, but people forget that there are people surviving.
Hmm.
There's people that got it, don't even know they had the symptom, or didn't even know they had it because they didn't have symptoms.
Right.
And we're going to work through this.
Well, we have
There's a
to.
lot of positive that can come out of this.
Yeah, the human race has to continue. I mean, it can't
Yeah,
just it's not gonna end here, right? I
no.
mean, this thing is not going to end us. We have to start moving forward and yeah, that's what I'm saying. The preventative care I think is so important now more than ever to start helping people live healthier and boost themselves. Have nutritionists talk about, what things to put in your body so that you
Oh
can
yeah.
fight things like this,
And
because
don't sit around.
McDonald's
Get out and do
McDonald
stuff. What?
McDonald's
Every
is not
day.
going to protect you from anything.
Right.
Eating Big Macs it's not going to help you against, some virus that's trying to kill you. It's not
You know
making
what's
you
funny?
stronger.
Since you mentioned that, and I know you went through the same diet that I did, kind of, sort of. Um, when you haven't had fast food in a long time,
Hmm.
your body changes its taste,
Oh yeah.
and all of a sudden, when you have it, you kind of think, "Ugh, the heck is this?"
Yep. Yep.
And
You
I
taste all
remember the
the
other
you
day,
taste
and
all
I
the
don't want to put McDonald's
regularities.
down, but I remember the other day, someone got me a filet-o-fish. I'm thinking, well, that's minor, and I don't generally eat that much bread. But the thing that struck me more than anything is, one, I really don't like French fries anymore, and
Hmm.
two, the buns are really weird at McDonald's.
Yep.
I don't know what it
Yep.
is. I, I heard they don't
They don't
ever
feel
go
like bread.
stale.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like bread when you touch it. It's very spongy.
Yeah, yeah, it's oddly spongy. So
Well, like you've seen, there's YouTube stuff out there, people lighting McDonald's French fries on fire and it burns green. Like
yeah,
it's not supposed to ever go bad. It's
no,
supposed to last in the freezer or under the heating tray forever until somebody comes and buys the food. That's what they've manufactured. So it's
yeah,
not surprising. It's just, but yeah, the other day we got McDonald's and so they got me a Big Mac or something. And I, like the first bite, I was just like, this isn't what I want. This is not what my body is telling me should be going in it. You
yeah.
know.
Yeah, and I actually, it's funny. After I went on my low carb diet, I started craving things like fish, which
Hmm.
I didn't dislike it, but I never made a point to have it, and now I have it all the time.
Yeah,
So a lot
I
more
think.
fruit, a lot more vegetables. That's what's good for your
Yeah,
body.
no, absolutely. For me, the weight loss for me was all. I mean, you lost a ridiculous amount of weight, so let's talk about that real quick too. For me, and I'm sure the people that listen to this podcast are tired of hearing about it, but intermittent fasting was a huge deal for me. 63 pounds now.
Yeah,
I put like 8 pounds back on, maybe not eight, 6 or 7 pounds since the pandemic. A lot of snacking. I've been up later.
yeah,
I've been
yeah,
staying up a lot later than I normally would have because I don't have anything to do. So I have like a lot more energy left at the end of the day than I should. So a lot of late night snacking. But yeah, 60 something pounds I've lost just eating within a window and having the discipline. But I mean, how much weight did you lose and
about the
how'd you
same
do it?
actually, about the same. Because I was up to 230,
Hmm.
and
Me too.
I've been talking for years about losing 20 pounds because I was at 220, 225 for a long time, and I wanted to get down to about 200.
Hmm.
And this went on for years and it just never happened. And then I was diagnosed diabetic a couple years ago in February. And I started reading about it, and I realized that it's not necessarily that what you eat makes you diabetic. This is my theory, by the way, and I'm not a doctor. I just play one on podcasts.
Right.
Um, but I'm looking at it thinking it doesn't seem like, and my doctors kind of confirmed this because I remember telling the doctor, talking to him after I was diagnosed, I said, "Why come you guys didn't mention stuff like this before?" And the doctor, "Why do you care?" And I said, "Well, because maybe I wouldn't have been diabetic." And the doctor says, "Well, you are," and at the time I was 50, 55 years old. He goes, "Well, you are over 50, and that means your pancreas is over 50. So what do you expect?" And I started thinking, oh, at first I had that same look you did, and like, what does he mean? And I realized what he's saying is it's not really your diet making you diabetic. It's this that your body is diabetic, so your diet makes you have high blood sugar. So
Okay.
I
Yeah.
wanted to get my body so it wasn't used to having sugar.
Hmm.
And so I went on low carb and I did some fasting like you were talking about. I would not eat for the first 8 hours being awake,
Hmm.
and then I'd have a smaller dinner meal. And I found that my snacks would be like celery and carrots. And I just found that in doing that, I felt better. I had energy that I didn't realize I didn't have, and I just overall felt better, and the weight started coming off. And I don't know how long it actually took me, but it was a relatively short amount of time that I got down to 170. I'm like you, I've gained some back in the last
Hmm.
month or so, so I'm kind of hovering 175. But I had to get a whole
Right.
new wardrobe because all my clothes were the wrong size. That's
Yeah,
kind of a good thing,
it's a great
though.
problem to have. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one of the best problems to have. I think I dropped 6 inches on my waist,
yeah,
something like that. I went from like 38 to now my 32s are really loose.
Yeah.
But I'm not buying 30-inch pants because I don't want to be that skinny. Um,
Well, you can
I've,
you never
I've
wanted to
been,
be in skinny jeans.
no, I never did. No, even in high school, that was never for me.
You were in
Um,
the era of loose pants. I can understand the idea.
yeah, buying pants now is very complicated for a man. I don't think enough people talk about that. It's
No,
all skinny
and
jeans.
buying a suit. Have you even gone to look for a
Yeah,
suit?
those are all slim too.
Yeah, everything is slim fit.
Yeah,
And they have slim fit, modern fit. What the heck's the difference? And then, whatever. So,
one's $30 more probably.
yeah.
Just clever marketing. But yeah, it's wild. Yeah, no, definitely no skinny jeans. I buy this is a free shout out. It's funny. So I wear plain shirts because like I don't work for you. Like I'm not, you know what I mean?
That's
Like
the way my
this
son
isn't,
is.
yeah, this isn't free advertising. Like
Yeah.
especially if I'm going to put on a show that is going to have substance and it's good for people. Like why don't you support that and be a part of it? Anyway, so the jeans that I buy, I guess I won't drop their name then. Um, I just buy them online
Yeah.
because they have like the dimensions, and I've only bought this one type of jean anyway since probably my early 20s.
Hmm.
But yeah, like so I own I'm very once I find something that I like, I'm gonna buy every color and variation of that thing for as long as you offer it. So like
Yeah.
shoes,
Once
I
you
have
find something good. Yeah.
yeah, I wear one brand of jeans. I wear two brands of shirts,
Hmm.
either these blank ones or one other brand. But then like all my shoes, they're all the same exact model of shoe. They're just different colors.
Yeah.
Um, because I'm comfortable. I like it. Well, I don't want to, especially with shoes. I'm a bit of a shoe snob, but like once you find that right pair of shoe and you break it in and it just, your foot's in there, you're good. Like you don't want to try another one and then, oh, well, it's kind of tight on the toes or,
Yeah.
it's a little
Yeah.
loose in the back. I just, if you can, if you have the privilege, it's a common word we like to use a lot today. The privilege of being able to just buy a bunch of the same pair of shoe,
Right.
regardless how expensive they are. Go for it, right?
Yes. I'm actually lucky because most of
Mhm.
the shoes I like show up at the discount stores.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, mine don't.
Yeah.
That's no. I wish my taste wasn't as expensive as it is. Um, let's talk school.
Right.
California school district. They've got a reputation. What are we doing right with schools in 2020, and what do we need to address immediately? Like, if what out there now? Like, let's start with the good, but eventually, I want to talk about the things that we need to address as people who are all a part of using this system in one way or another. Like, what do we need to address and start, actively trying to improve?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have as a problem is we've kind of taken choice away from the kids. Everyone's going to go to college, and they've made it difficult for kids to do what they want because everyone's going to go to college. At least, LA
Mhm.
Unified is everyone's going to do A through G ready. Not every district does that, but there's a push for that.
Mhm.
California actually rates you on the number of kids who end up graduating A through G ready. So even if there's not a policy in place, there's still that push. That's not
Right.
a bad thing necessarily, because I do think college is good for a lot of people. But that doesn't mean everyone has to go to a 4-year university straight out of high school. Some
Right.
kids aren't mature enough to do it. Some
Mhm.
kids can't afford it, and so what you're doing is you're making school kind of a drudgery thing. I did fine in school, but my favorite classes were auto shop. Well, colleges hate auto shop.
Right.
Electronics lab. Well, colleges hate any shop actually. And you've taken away a lot of the survival classes, the home ec and cooking, sewing, those type of classes
Mhm.
that kind of built the hands-on and the need for why are you learning mathematics? Well, so you can actually calculate what you need to have in the circuit for electronics. So you can actually
Right.
measure what you're doing, and you can have the logic for what you're looking at in your car. So I don't like that push. I do understand it, but I don't like it. So I would like to see kind of more of a way to get people who can work in industry as well, because those are the jobs you can't necessarily ship overseas, whereas you can
Hmm.
ship pretty much anything engineering wise now.
Right.
Through the internet, you can do everything overseas and all that. So that's one of the problems. The second problem is a little bit hard to explain because people think, well, wasn't that a great idea? And why don't you think it's a great idea? California had some great standards in place for learning. The frameworks that they came up with in the 90s and kind of debuted at the end of the 90s for mathematics were stellar. A lot of people pushed back on them because they were very rigorous, and a lot of people didn't understand the logic in them that was embedded in the standards. They kept saying, oh, you're making robots and they don't think. Well, no, there were reasoning standards that were part of it. They just weren't separately listed. They were kind of embedded into the standard. So then you have, and that was California. They were based off of standards that were benchmarked around the world. They took ones from worldwide successful countries and tried to come up with standards that would work here, and that's what they kind of refined, which was through relatively recently. Then Bill Gates decides to come out
Uh-oh.
and push Common Core.
Yep.
And everyone says that it came from the governors coming together saying, we want to do this. That's all bullshit. I don't know if I can say that, but it is.
Say whatever
No
you want.
governor went anywhere and said, we want to do this. Obama and Arnie Duncan, and maybe you can get this podcast out to Arnie Duncan because I'd like to tell him that I think he's can I say asshole?
You can say whatever you want, man.
Because he pushed this thing. It wasn't even ready when he pushed it, but they push these Common Core standards. Well, the Common Core, yeah, they're better than the absolute worst standards that were out there. If you
Hmm.
want to find the lowest of the low from what was available before, yeah, Common Core is better than that because they're actual standards, but they're not even close to being the quality that California had.
Hmm.
And the other problem that happened with Common Core, besides not being great, besides not being clear, besides having odd orders to how you teach things
Right.
and what you do, the mathematics standards weren't even signed off by mathematicians. The mathematicians refused to sign off on them because they didn't agree with the direction they were going. So the guy who actually ended up pushing them to finish was an English major. So they're
How,
not that great to start with
how in the heck could a new math be pushed forward when mathematicians don't approve it? How does
because
that
they put it
happen?
into a committee. And the committee said, this is great. And then they said to the governors, hey, we got these. What do you think? And they said, well, I don't know, whatever. So Arnie Duncan says, hey, if you do this, we'll give you money. And we'll even make
Mm.
it a contest. And you get extra points if you say you're going to do it. The whole thing was very convoluted. To make it even worse, besides the standards, because standards are standards, you can work with them however you want. But to make it worse, they put a document at the end that was never even approved by a committee. This is actually done by that English major, Philip Darrow. Um, he put in a thing on how to teach, and it got into all these weird convoluted things. So if you see those things on the internet about how you're supposed to teach multiplication, there's one that's like 33 times 26 or whatever. And the greatest
Mhm.
video is this guy who makes coffee and then he goes and washes his car and he's doing this
Right. And
all
the
while
same
this
amount of
woman
time.
is
Yeah.
solving this one problem. Um, that's the stuff they're pushing, and it bores the hell out of bright kids, and the
Right.
kids who aren't as bright don't get it. So basically we're going to be killed by foreign countries because none of our brightest are even getting the mathematics unless they go back to the traditional algorithms.
Right.
Now you can still say why the algorithms work, that was part of the old embedded standards, but it's a mess math wise. And my understanding from all the other teachers I talked to is that the other subjects are pretty much just as bad. So I was hoping that when Arnold Schwarzenegger got voted out and our new governor was Jerry Brown, I was hoping Jerry Brown would actually come in and say, okay, no more Common Core. But he
Right.
didn't. We stayed with it. And the timing was actually perfect because we had all the books in place. The Common Core books weren't in place. And we ended up having to spend a lot of money to replace all the old, really good math books with what's really bad now. I cannot stand using the books anymore. And there's not even a common thing. We used to have a committee in California, I was part of it, where we would review the books and make sure that they met the standards and they were quality books and they were pedagogically. Boy, I need an English major now.
Yeah.
But we need them to be, books that teachers can successfully use, and we don't have that anymore. Now it's just whatever whim the districts have. Now there's a good side because districts can choose what they want. The bad side is districts can choose what they want, and the books we happen to use were the best of the ones we were allowed to choose from. But I'll tell you, the Algebra 2 book is awful, absolutely awful. I don't even want to give the company credit.
So, so how then? I mean, are there any teachers who are pro Common Core? Do you know any educators that are like, hell yeah, Common Core is the best. That old math
I,
sucks.
I do know some. I don't. I haven't met any that I think are exceedingly high level teachers. It could be
Okay.
that I haven't met them yet. It could be that there are pro Common Core that happen to be good teachers. I have really not met good teachers that think it's good. They'll work with it and they'll tolerate it and they'll say
Hmm.
we're okay and they'll take some good ideas from it. But for the most part, I really don't know, especially in math, I don't know any math teachers who, know calculus, know what you need for calculus, and think it's a good idea.
And on top of that, the majority of the teachers that you know are not in favor of it.
Right, right.
So how can that be true? And we've still been doing this for how long now?
It's probably about 10 years since they first were pushing it.
So a decade of this, all the while, most teachers worth their weight understand this is not a good way of going. How is it
Right.
still here? Like, what needs to be done that had, like, how do we get rid of it? How do we get it out of the school system?
I kind of wish I knew because there is no requirement for them to be there, but because the testing systems are using the standards as the basis for the test, and our local one, they call it Smarter Balanced Test, and there's another one that's called something else. Um, by the
Some
way,
other
that's a
ambiguous name that makes it sound
yeah,
really
and
cheerful.
and
Yeah,
it's another monopoly. There's one company that's behind it, and they're making a ton because they get
of
whatever it is,
course.
$7 per test for half of the
Right.
country. But because those tests are what they use to judge schools, you have to kind of at least expose the kids to their tests. The interesting thing is, though, even in the states that thought it was a great idea and ran with it and wanted to do the best and did all the training and whatever, they're not finding success. The test scores are not going up. And everyone wants to say, well, the tests are harder. No, actually, the tests aren't harder. The tests are the same. In some ways, they could even be easier, but the kids aren't understanding it as well because it's just so out there.
Yeah,
If they
it's
did what they said they were going to do, which is to take standards and simplify it so that they always talked about school being, oh, we're a mile wide and just a couple inches deep. We want to make Common
mhm.
Core is going to make it deeper. Well, it didn't do that. What it ended up doing is combined a lot of topics into one and then said, look, we only have 10 topics now for this unit. Well, it's actually 25 topics, but you now combine them all. So it's hard to tell. So
Yeah.
I don't know. There's no easy fix, but I think going back to what I started with, I think if you went back to the days of allowing kids who are really good in math take math classes, kids who are really good in English take English classes, take people who really like history take history classes, and let them choose even in high school a major, like when I was in school, then I think you'd be better off. I don't honestly understand why colleges require Algebra 2 as an entrance requirement.
Hmm.
And an argument with a guy who once said, well, we have found that people who are successful in Algebra 2 do well in college. And knowing that in college, the only reason I did a lot of math was because I was a mathematics oriented major,
Right.
I asked him, okay, is that because you need the Algebra 2 in college, or the type of kid who could pass an Algebra 2 class does well in college? And he goes, it's probably that. I'm like,
Right,
okay, well,
right.
fine. So now you're throwing everyone into these upper level math classes, and you're forcing everyone to take 2 to 3 years of a foreign language. For
Hmm.
what purpose? I think it was to keep kids out of college because you want to have high, if you don't have enough room in college, you want to keep kids out. But if everyone's going to go, you want them all in. So
Hmm.
it's like we don't have this set. In California, I think one of the problems is we haven't kept up with the demand. We haven't kept up with the population. We haven't kept up with the demand for college level education. And in trying to theoretically prepare the kids, we've sent mixed messages. I think college should actually be open to anyone who wants to go. Maybe not the premier universities or whatever, but if you offered classes to everyone who wants to go, as they mature, as they get their knowledge, they're going to excel. And even if they don't end up with a degree, your society is that much better off. And college should not be as expensive as it is either. But
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. I've heard some people suggesting, similar things, but potentially having something like community colleges being just public. You can
mhm,
go and get further education if you want it. But if you want to, go to law school or one of these upper level schools, you're going to have to either invest or take out a loan or
yeah,
whatever if you want to get to that next level. But I agree the sentiment that a smarter public is a better public. I mean,
yeah.
if the people in your community were more educated, more well-rounded, they knew more things, they would probably make better choices because
Right,
they have more information to use when making choices. And you might have less people throwing their McDonald's styrofoam stuff out their window when they're driving down the road
right.
if they had taken some sort of a class that taught them about the environment, you know what I mean, or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, I think I agree. I thought that, with my very extensive, experience in the education system, uh, I would like to see, if it was up to me, I would incentivize education wherever the country needed it. So if we needed like engineers, we can always use engineers.
hmm
So if you want to go into engineering, the country will pay for it, so long as you work in the country for 8 years after you get your degree.
Yeah.
Pay it off, work it back off, so we can get something out of this deal. But you're going to get this thing for free, and the country is going to get 8 years of this highly motivated person
Well,
to do whatever it is
and
we need to do.
one thing you can do though is figure out why it costs so much.
Right.
I mean, when you think of when I went to school, we didn't have tuition, we had fees.
Hmm.
So this is back in the 1981, I went to Long Beach State, and in 1984, I transferred over to UCLA. Long Beach was $111 a semester, so $200 a year. Someone can figure out the inflation for that.
It was
You,
$111.
yeah, I remember everyone was out of sorts because it had just gone up to that, and you're getting out of the affordability index. And then
Mm.
UCLA was 400 a quarter, so 1,200 a year. Again, figure that out in real dollars. You could actually go to school and pay for it with a part-time job because I did it. That's how I know you can do it, is I did it. You can't do that anymore.
No.
So why has it gone up so much? When you think of between the fees that you actually pay, the tuition you pay, and the tuition that is subsidized by the state, you have these, UCs and Cal States that are probably getting about $40,000 a year. Why? And then you start looking at this. I remember this years ago from an LA Times article. They were talking about the new UC president, and it was kind of a throwaway line in an LA Times article, but they mentioned the number of students and they mentioned the number of employees, and the numbers were almost the same. And I started thinking, well, there's your problem. If you have the exact same number of employees as you do students, every student is paying for an
Right.
employee,
You're
whether they
basically
be part-time or full-time.
you're
So
paying for the janitor, you're paying for the lawn maintenance
yeah,
guy. Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
why is that? Why is it that have that much money that is going to the universities? Well, because they're allowed to. It's another monopoly. When you think about it, if everyone's going to college, when they made loans easy to get, when they made grants easy to get, that's when universities started jacking up their tuition.
Hmm.
So someone needs to go through and say, why do professors only teach 1 or 2 classes per semester? Why aren't they teaching 3 or 4? There's no reason that you can't do that. And if you can just get the affordability back so that someone who, could work a part-time job or work full-time long enough to save it, if they could start getting their degree that way again, I think you'd solve a lot of problems.
So who steps in and makes them do that?
I
The
don't know.
government
Apparently,
take
I have to
over
become
education?
governor. Besides owning an AM station,
Yeah.
I'm going to
So we
have to
got to get
become
you a
governor.
radio station, and we also have to get you into office. Okay. By the end of this episode, you're gonna have a lot of things you're gonna have to do.
Right. But it's funny that when you mention the schools, California has a bad reputation of schools, and some of it's deserved, but a lot of it's not, because you have to realize what California is dealing with. We do have the most immigrants, the most kids who are speaking different languages. A lot of them come from villages that they didn't necessarily start out with strong education coming here, and yet we still put out an awful lot of pretty good students who do succeed in university and in life. Um, but I don't also want to put down the immigrants too, because when I worked at Huntington Park High School, a lot of the kids came from Mexico and the countries that surround Mexico as well. And if they went to schools in Mexico City, they were stellar.
Hmm.
And I was always impressed. The kids couldn't speak English. They'd learn English and then make fun of the kids who couldn't speak English. But they were in math. I didn't have to teach them. They knew it already.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of good in those kids. And I think just a lot of the problem is there's a reputation because of language barriers, but a lot of the kids do come out well. And in the public schools, there's a reason that the public schools usually win the academic decathlon, because they are doing well with a lot of kids. So
Hmm.
you have to kind of keep things in perspective. It sometimes sounds bad, but it's not as bad as it seems. And you see the same thing with the COVID crisis. Everything sounds bad because that's what you hear. What
Hmm.
you're not hearing about is the fact that 98.5% of the people who get it are fine.
Right.
You know. Anyway, yeah, LA Unified has its own issues, and so much of LA Unified's problems get back down to everything is political in education now.
Hmm.
You're serving a huge population, many of whom are very poor. Not everyone, obviously. A lot of people who cheat on the application to get free lunches, but it's a huge population. But everything is so damn political now that that's the only reason I look at it now and think, well, maybe the district does need to be broken up, because how do you keep this going?
Hmm.
You have to pretend you're fair with everyone, but one policy is not going to fit the kids that are living in poverty in one part of Los Angeles versus the kid who's living in a rich part of the valley or whatever. You're
Right.
not going to have the exact same thing and the same needs. So, I blame the politicians for a lot of it. Everything's become politicized, and if you sneeze, someone sues you. you know?
Yeah. It's a scary time in 2020 for sure,
Yep.
being in any
But
sort of
I will tell
spotlight.
you though, I'm one of the biggest critics of LA Unified when they make stupid decisions, and I'll post it on Facebook if I think it's bad enough. But I have to tell you, I've actually been pleased with the actions of our current superintendent Buettner, um, against a lot of pressure and what you would think would be against the odds of doing the right thing. I think he's handled the COVID crisis quite well. We were one of the few districts that had training ahead of time. It was, jump in the fire type training, but we were ready to go with online learning as soon as they took us out in March. They had us do some extra training during the first couple weeks, and now they're even certifying. I think it's about, I don't know how many. I know there's at least 4,000 teachers that are doing it for extra training to try to, in case we need to go into fall with online learning. So I actually, unless there's stuff that I don't know, I can't say anything bad about what Buettner has done. Um, I'm kind of
During
impressed with
this
how the
crisis.
district has handled all of this.
Is that what you're hearing coming down the pipe right now? Is potentially even the fall is going to be be
Yeah,
ready
it's
for
so
that?
up in the air, no one knows. My wife just had a meeting for sports, and they're talking about no athletics during the fall semester, which I don't know how you're going to do that. But then they said, well, we'll combine it with winter, possibly. But they kept saying, we don't know. No one knows.
Right.
The governor has been, he's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place because even though I think the science is, I mean, we know the estimates were wrong. Everything about what shut the entire country down was wrong. We didn't
Hmm.
have the problems of the number of people getting it. We didn't have as many deaths, thank God, as they predicted.
Hmm.
But so we shut down. The new information came out. We didn't open up again because now everyone's afraid.
Hmm.
How do you open up safely without putting people in jeopardy? So I disagree with a lot of what our governor is doing.
Hmm.
I'm thankful for the areas that are opening up, and I hope that they don't have issues. But all of that is accelerating everyone. So who knows? Maybe in a short time we will be opened up again. I hope so. Anyway.
Yeah, things are slowly starting to open here a little bit. Restaurants are opening this week or next week.
Yeah,
Um, by the time this airs, restaurants will be open, so
we
we'll
we
see
get
how that
conflicting
goes.
information constantly. Just a couple days ago, we're told that we're going to be closed through at least July. And I'm thinking, oh, that's great. That's going to work
Hmm.
really well because people are going to rebel. And then out comes yesterday. They want to be open by July, I don't know, 1st. So who knows what's going to happen? Um, I wish that we could take the, I mean, again, I'm not a doctor, I just play one on podcast,
Right.
but I wish we could do what really should be done in any pandemic. You protect the vulnerable. I mean, in some ways we had to shut down because you had to find out more about the virus. This is all new.
Hmm.
But you've never in the past put people in quarantine that aren't sick.
Right.
And what you're finding now in places like New York, where Governor Cuomo was complaining that, well, now we're seeing 2/3 of our cases are people who stayed home, and he's actually saying it as, see, we still have to stay home. I'm looking at it as, oh, that's a failure of staying home because we knew that flattening the curve just extends it out.
Hmm.
You're not necessarily cutting the number of deaths. You're actually just extending the pandemic and causing more people to get sick. And if you're staying in, you're actually hurting your immunities because you're not exposing your body to the natural immunities that you get by dealing with people.
Plus,
So,
people just naturally are only going to be able to stay home and not interact with people for so long before they start taking liberties, and they're going to hang out with two or three people here, three or four
yeah,
there. It's inevitable. It's going to happen at some point that people are going to get
all
tired
the people
and
that thought it was actually going to stop the virus were fools
right.
because if it was going to stop the virus, it would be gone by now. But
Hmm.
I mean, you look at Gene Baxter from Kevin and Bean. He's
Hmm.
the Bean. He's out in England. He didn't go out of his house. He didn't do anything, and he got it. His wife hasn't gotten it so far, but he did. So, you know, to me, staying at home is not necessarily the best idea. And again, I don't know all the information, but
Interesting
it just
that
seems
his
like it's
wife
better.
didn't get it.
Well, it just seems like we should be protecting the people who need to be protected. If my mom were still alive, we would be protecting her.
Right.
People who have immune systems that are bad, you want to
Compromised.
keep
Yeah.
them, and you want to watch for symptoms, and you want to be able to strike right away if they have a problem. But for someone like me, you don't have to protect me. I can protect
Right.
myself. I can if I liken it to a beehive. I'm not going to stick my head in a beehive, but I'm not going to be scared of bees.
Right.
So I know COVID's out there, but I'm not going to live my life sheltered forever.
And
And
if
I
you
just
get
think
sick, if you happen to get some symptoms, you go get them addressed. And if you're one of the part of the, 1% or even less than 1% of people who actually end up dying from it, then I mean, I guess that's your roll of the dice. But that's a very low percentage that we're seeing,
yeah,
at least what we're seeing. I mean, and that's the other issue too, which this is a soapbox I can get on forever and ever, is the media. The media does more damage than it does good anymore. It's you
oh,
can't
the
even
media's
trust
lazy.
them. You can't even trust that they're telling you the truth, let
No,
alone every article or everything that you consume from them. Your first objective is, well, what's your bias so that I can get past it so that I could try to find out what you're actually talking about. But
Yeah.
I got to know who you're talking shit about first before I can really hear you, because you're slamming somebody, because there's always an agenda, and you're bought and paid for by a handful of people.
Oh yeah, and it's funny because people will look at Trump, and I have no idea what your audience is, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, or neutral,
Me either.
but people keep saying, well, if he had just acted faster. Well, how could he have acted faster?
Yeah.
Because he had every advisor that was medically proficient, Dr. Fauci, that everyone looks up to. He said in January, in February, that it's not a big deal.
CDC, World Health Organization, at one point tweeted or sent out a message that it couldn't be sent, or it couldn't be contracted human to human.
Yeah, human to human.
Nobody
And that
knew.
was in
Nobody
February.
knew.
World Health Organization and China were both saying
Yeah.
that. So
Nobody
you have
knew.
all these things. We have 100 cases in the United States later. I mean, this is before even anyone acted. I'm looking at it as I'm not, and again, I'm not saying Trump did the right thing or the wrong thing. And
Right.
there's things that I would, if I were him, I would have handled differently, certainly. But if you have 20 of your advisors are saying this isn't a big deal, the World Health Organization is saying it's not a big deal, Fauci's saying it's not a big deal, and two people are saying, oh, it's a big deal.
And you're a
He tried to,
reality TV star.
yeah,
You're gonna listen to your advisors, man.
yeah.
He's not a doctor yet. He has no business making that decision on his own. He's
If
gonna
he had
listen to the people
acted,
around him.
I mean, look what happened. He tried to put in a travel ban. He was accused of
Mm-hmm.
overreacting. So if he had tried to do
Xenophobia.
anything, he would have been accused of overreacting. So there's nothing you could do. And then when they talk about he fired the pandemic crew, he didn't fire them. He saw the overlap and it went. He put them back into the areas that they were working before. It wasn't like we lost them, and they still were
Mm-hmm.
invited. They might have even been the two people that were telling them to do something. But
Right.
when you only have 100 cases, people would not have listened. And even in March, if you recall, people were still saying, you know, go hug a Chinese person, go
Yeah.
to, little China, go do this, go do that. You know, I'm not necessarily even saying that they were wrong either because they didn't know, but don't blame one person if you were saying basically the same thing.
Well, Trump or no Trump, uh, I think the real gross issue here is that all of these people are so tied up and focused on this left versus right, blue versus red.
Yeah,
We have to keep this show going and keep the public tantalized, because the minute that they don't have something juicy to bite into that the opposing team has done, they're going to have enough time to realize this is a bunch of crap, and you're being deceived, and you're being told these your neighbors are your enemies. Meanwhile, it's all just a big show. Pelosi had to say something. She had to shit on Trump because that's her job. She's
yeah,
on the other team. And it happened. It happened to Obama. Maybe not at this rate. I mean, the level at which Trump gets hate is definitely higher than anybody in the past. But again, he's also not a career politician. So what do you
yeah.
expect him to get a
And
lot of
there's a
love
whole
from the
theory
other
on
career politicians?
why Trump is being handled a certain way. My own
Mm-hmm.
theory is he knows more than they want him to know. I think there's a certain group that likes the status quo, and he's upsetting the status quo,
Mm-hmm.
so they're basically panicked and they're jumping at him that way. But
Well, look at what. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
what I'd like to see Trump do is to act more. And I know people have complained about this, and I'm going to do it in a different way than most people say. Act a little bit more presidential.
Right.
One of my favorite slogans was from Truman, where the buck stops here, meaning, obviously, I take responsibility. So I wish Trump would just say something like, you know, maybe we could have acted differently at the beginning. We didn't know, and that's my fault. We're dealing with it now. Here's what we're doing. That's a much stronger way of doing it, and I think it would bring, if he's trying to win people over to his side, that's a much stronger way of doing it than saying, "Oh, Obama screwed up and I inherited this." Well, no one gives a crap anymore. You've been in there 3 years. Now it's your thing.
The the thing that I see that's really like amplifies that are these daily press briefings where, and I still don't understand, and maybe you have a theory on this. So the guy, and again, Trump aside, I don't care about Trump, not pro whatever. He's a person right now, the person who's sitting in this presidential seat. Um, when he's talking, like taking questions, You know the CNN guy is right there. And then
Yeah.
the only question he's going to ask is, how do you feel about being so awful? Like, that's
Yeah.
the only thing he's going to ask you. He's waiting to zing you,
Yeah.
and you say anything weird or anything that's not exactly, safe. Oh, headline news, Trump said this thing. Because that's what they're in. Their TV is dying because everyone knows they're full of
Yeah.
crap.
And,
Nobody's
and a lot
watching
of
them
so
anymore.
many things are taken out of context and things
Yeah,
like
they
that.
have to. They have to
Yeah.
make the clickbait because that's how they get money. They've
Yeah.
pushed themselves in this weird corner where now the only way that they can make money is by making things up or making things juicier than they actually are,
Right.
because that's all that people care about right now. And that's
Yeah.
adding really toxic energy all around, because all you're hearing from this giant, you know, news agency is negative, 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 negative. Let's say how bad this is. Let's talk about how bad this is. Like, there is
Yeah.
no positive anything being spoken about, and that negative energy is really, it's palpable right now in the
Yeah.
country.
Yep. Yep. And it's funny though, if you do watch the press conferences, they're almost fun because I think there's more banter than either side will admit.
Right.
You can sometimes, when they pan the audience, you can see some of them smiling when Trump says something.
Right.
Now, does that mean he should? Probably not. Does that mean they should? No. But there's. I don't think that the Trump versus the press is really as strong as the press is making it sound. It's very
Right.
bizarre.
I just don't understand. So if it was me, like, I would allow another journalist who wasn't going to just talk shit no matter what I said. They're just going to trash me, and they're not
Yeah.
even going to ask productive questions. You only get to have like 10 journalists in the room because of social distancing. Like, why wouldn't you let NPR, or, you know what I mean? Like, some other, anybody, let me in there. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask better questions than that idiot is asking right now. Like,
Right.
because I legitimately want to know information. He doesn't want to know anything. His job is to go in there and get him to catch him, get him to
Try to
trip
catch it.
up on
Yeah.
his words.
And you see that even if you post a Facebook article
Hmm.
that is not going with what the current thinking is. Like I was posting
Right.
articles about maybe COVID isn't quite as bad as we thought. Maybe the lockdown is not quite as. And I'm not even saying that that's what I necessarily agree with. I just want an open discussion. And then there's people that will get on there and just start blowing holes in that, and then try to change the subject. Like, and the other day, someone posted something on Trump and he didn't respond fast enough. I said, how can you say that? Fauci said this
Hmm.
during this time. Oh, he never said that. So I posted a video of Fauci saying exactly what I said he said. And the response is, well, maybe that, but how about
Yeah. Right.
this?
Right.
And it's like they
Right.
won't even admit when they're wrong and they're trying to trip you up. And that's kind of what's happening in this press corps. They don't necessarily want to get information from Trump. They just want to trip him up.
Right,
And
because
you
they're
see that
on
a lot.
Team Blue and he's not on Team Blue.
Right.
So you have to hate anybody that isn't on Team Blue. And people are starting to buy into that. This identity politics that we're living in is scary, because there are people who are willing to say really awful things to people in their own community that they're going to see at the grocery store, and maybe their kid goes to school with their kid, but they feel really comfortable just saying really awful things
Yeah.
because they're on the wrong team. But neither team is really doing anything for the people, right? Like,
No. And
it's
it's
not
not
like Team
productive.
Blue helped any more than Team Red. They both want to control the people,
Yep.
and they're going to exploit you in different ways, but neither team is not going to exploit the people.
Yeah. It's
But
funny
if the
because,
wrong team's in, you're gonna fight that till that's the hill you're gonna die on.
well, and nothing's productive. You're not having a
Right.
real dialogue because no one's listening. You're not coming up with good solutions. The best solutions come when you are able to listen to someone so you can see a different perspective and you say, oh, I get it now. How about if we do this? And I think that in a weird way, that's why, and they won't admit it publicly, but that's why a lot of Republicans don't like Trump either, because he kind of thinks a little bit differently than a lot of them.
Right. Well,
And
there's a lot of like, I'm gonna cut your tree down, and then I'm gonna
yeah,
plant my tree here, and then the next guy I'm gonna cut his tree down. You still only have one tree.
Yeah.
you still only end up with one tree. We're
Right.
not getting more trees because this guy's planting a tree that's better than this last guy's tree. We still only have one tree.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's
That's not
bizarre.
progress.
We need to get past that, though. We certainly do.
Yes, I mean, but what do we do? We're being told voting anything other than red or blue is throwing away a vote, and a lot of people believe that. So, I mean, how do we get past that?
I don't know. Maybe we can make a pact to just try to be more honest, but not insulting. Because that's what I was trying to do on Facebook with my posts is I was trying to be open-minded and post
Right.
things and open it up for discussion. I've gotten to the point where I just delete messages that are antagonistic.
Counterproductive or
Yeah,
not helping. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm the
But
same way. I don't
one thing
really
to keep in
interact
mind with
on.
Facebook is there's only like 3 people reading it, so it's not like you're convincing the world.
It's a lot of my old teachers. I see them on there. Old Nagel still running around. That dude was a character.
Yeah,
I have fond memories of being in his class.
yeah. I forgot about that. You had him.
I did. I did. I did. Yeah, yeah, I probably shouldn't talk about the stories that are because you don't have any boring stories that stick with you that long. It's only the ones that probably shouldn't have happened.
Yep, yep.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I wonder if we couldn't make like a pact, like a vote independent 2020, like
Yeah,
stop
really.
playing their game. You know what I mean? And it probably won't be this year because all the things that are going on. But yeah, that's a soapbox that I'm on all the time on this podcast. Is neither party has our interests in mind, so why are we still voting for them or
Right.
supporting
Well, and
any of
and
them?
it's not anything that I remember my boss when I worked at Sears. Are they still in business? Um,
I don't know.
back when they were really big, America's the largest retailer at the time. And I remember him telling me we're having a staff meeting and people are complaining about this, complaining about that. He goes, I anyone can complain. Can I hear a solution?
Right.
And if we all had that attitude, it would go a long way. And I know that's difficult for people because people have, they want to get into a bitch session.
Hmm.
But if they can just think a little bit past that, maybe they can find good in everyone. And it's funny because when Trump was elected, in a way, I liked it because I was afraid of Hillary anyway. I don't trust
Absolutely.
her, but I wasn't a Trump fan at all. And
Right.
first thing he puts in place is Betsy DeVos for education secretary, and I think she's a moron, wrong person for it. But then I started thinking a little more, and I'm watching his actions, and I realized he's not doing that many bad things. There's a lot of things he's doing that are right on. And then I started analyzing it more, and I thought, well, he did say he wanted to get rid of the education department in the federal government. Problem is, you can't get rid of the education department in the federal government because people would complain too much.
Hmm.
So, what's the next best thing you can do? Put in place the stupidest person you possibly can find who's relatively harmless because she has no power to do anything. And if she does
Hmm.
do anything, people are going to bitch about it because it's just stupid. And I could be judging her totally wrong, but I think she's an absolute total idiot moron. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's like getting rid of the education department in the federal government. you know? And I look at it and I'm thinking, okay, well he's done that. He's handled he hasn't actually, in spite of his auditory attacks on certain people and personal
Hmm.
insults and things like that. He hasn't really attacked certain things, and yet you're beginning to see things come out that really shouldn't have happened. The Flynn case shouldn't have happened.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people involved in that should be probably in prison for violating a lot of constitutional rights.
Absolutely.
That would
Human
never have
rights.
come out if Trump wasn't in power. So now I'm looking at it as, well, maybe he's not who I thought he was. And maybe that's why he pisses off everyone, not just Democrats. But that's just a
Yeah,
theory.
there's a lot of theory. There's a lot of that's a very common theory that whether he knows it or not. He is because I mean, it makes sense. You put somebody in a situation that they have no business being in. They're not going to go the same direction that everybody else did. They're going to run into a lot of different things and uncover things because they're not going and they're not walking the same path. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, let's look at this. I'm not going to ask this person. I'm just going to go look at it myself, or I'm going to have my guy go look at it. Somebody I would trust, not some political
Yeah.
stooge who's in on the cut. Like, let's let's really investigate this thing.
Well, look how many Chinese they're so worried about the Russians, but look how many Chinese connections there are with a lot of people in government right now.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Look how many connections there are with, who got really good paying jobs with no experience or whatever. And it's not
Right.
just one. I don't want to refer to the one everyone knows about, but it's a lot of them. That's not a good thing. That means that
Right.
these people are bought off by these countries.
And have
And
been for probably a lot longer
yeah,
than we've known about it.
right. And again, it's the status quo. People are used to it. We shouldn't be used to it. And if newspapers were worth a darn and the reporters actually had the power to do it, they would have investigated this years ago. You
Problem is
know,
they're too big. All of the news agencies, whether it's print, whether it's digital, they're all too big. They're owned, and I mean the reason that they are as big as they are is because of the people whose secrets they have to keep.
yeah.
So they
I
can't
think I
report
think
on
Watergate, except that it was a Republican president, but even at that, I think Watergate would be allowed to happen with no penalty now because no one would even really report on it.
it.
It would
Right.
take too much work.
Or and they just bury it, or the news would tell you
Yeah.
it's not a big deal, and no one has the time working 40, 50 hours a week and having a family and a social life, or at least trying to find one. They don't have the time to do the actual legwork research to get to the real story. If the news says it's not a big deal, well, I guess it's not a big deal.
Right. Right. So
Everybody used to wake up every morning and spend an hour reading the paper before they went off and started their day. Now it's, well, let me check Facebook real quick. Let me just
yeah.
skim through what my friends have thought was important enough to share.
And let's see what the
And that's,
Kardashians are up to now.
yeah, oh, that's a great one. Saving people from jail, apparently getting people out of prison. They're more
Yep.
active than they're doing better work than the media is.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. I hoped that this pandemic would be um, the silver lining might be that people got to really sit without all the distraction, sit with themselves. Like, how do they feel within themselves? Like, are they happy with what they've got? Do they
I think
want
that's happening.
to keep
I
going in
do.
this direction?
I think that
But
actually.
also to wake up to a lot of the bad things, like the how controlled we are, the illusion of freedom, the
Oh yeah.
illusion of you know, oh, you
Yeah.
could do whatever you want, but really everything's already owned by a giant corporation, and
Yeah.
monopolies are allowed to exist because they've lobbied to change the laws so that it's cool. They can act as a person now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm inspired by some of the young people in town though, because they're, like my brother was talking about. I don't care what you're protesting. They're protesting. They're getting involved. They're actually
mhm.
seeing that things affect them, and I think that bodes well. I'm a lot more positive about the future because of what the young generation is doing right now than I've ever been.
What kind of things are you seeing
It's just that
besides the protest?
they're thinking differently. They're actually thinking, hey, this isn't right. We know things are not, and I hear people saying, well, you're just protesting that the beaches are closed or whatever. Well, that's what's important to them.
Right.
And
And should they
it
really
takes
be
a little bit.
closed?
You get involved that way, then you realize, hey, maybe we made a difference. Then they go and get involved in another way, and then you have buy-in from the generation, and it's not just a bunch of old guys running things.
Yeah, that's another thing I got stuck on talking with a friend of mine is why is it that we are obsessed with electing senior citizens to run the country?
I know.
Like, what is with that? The minimum age is 35. Why is our minimum accepted range in the 60s, 70s? Like, what is with
Yeah,
that? We
yeah.
don't trust young people. We want the old people to keep doing it the old way, even though we know it doesn't work.
Yeah, it is kind of bizarre.
I don't understand. That's why I was a little bit, what's the word? Optimistic about the Democratic national debate because like at least there's some young people on there. Of course, they got rid of them pretty quickly, but
Yeah.
like at
Give,
least they were
give that
there.
to 80-year-old guys.
Right? Yeah. All right, youngin, shut up. The grown-ups are talking now. You guys got to get out of here. We got this senile old man, and he's the one we
Yep.
want.
See, one senile and one angry.
Yeah, one very angry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really wanted to see a Bernie Trump 2020, but now I'm thinking since they went with Biden, which I mean, of course they did. I mean, why is anybody surprised at all that magically nobody voted for Bernie?
I
Okay.
know.
I don't know a single person that voted for Biden. Not a single person
Mhm.
who in the primary went that direction, yet somehow he's our guy. Okay. But
Well,
anyway,
because it's all a secret, because all of the
right,
people who are behind Biden, I think Biden doesn't even know he's running anymore, but
right,
all the people
exactly.
who want to control him are going to pull the strings.
I feel really bad for him. Like
I do too. At times, I feel like it's elder
he
abuse.
had a legacy. He had a legacy that he could have been really proud of, I guess. I mean, with the amount of corruption and whatever. But like, he could have just, sat back, like, cool, I was a vice president. Not a lot of people could say that. I got
Right.
things done, maybe, whatever. But now, because he's on Team Blue, they're going to weekend at Bernie him and basically, like, we're going to keep you in a room. You're not going to be able to talk to anybody. We don't want
Yeah.
any press of you. Don't speak to anybody because you can't even keep your words together. Well, the idea of you is what's going to run.
Right.
We're just going to run the idea of Biden. The vice president's going to be the person who's going to run everything because either you're going to die or we're going to make you die so
Yeah.
that this other person can be the one who's going to run it. So I'm really curious who they put in as his VP because that's really who they're running as president. And I've heard rumors of bringing Obama back, which I don't even know if you can do that. Can you, as a president, go
I
back
don't.
and be a vice
Well,
president?
I guess technically you could, but I'm not sure how it would work if Biden died, and you know, I don't know. It's a good question.
It's one for the history books, and when they own everything, I mean, they can kind of do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah.
And then I've also
Well,
heard Hillary.
they might use his husband, Michelle. Sorry.
Low hanging fruit. Uh, but but yeah, I don't know. I'm really interested. But if I was Trump, especially if he is the wild card that some people believe that he is, I would just be like, all right, Andrew Yang, like, let's just shake this thing up. Be my VP because I've heard he's not going to run with Pence 2020.
Yeah.
So who's Trump's VP going to be? Wouldn't that be the wild card? He grabs Bernie or
Oh, that would
Yang.
be
Like,
funny, wouldn't it?
dude, why not? Be like, screw you. I do what
Yeah.
I want. Like,
Yeah.
what do you have to say now, CNN? Like, you know, but I mean, I don't know. I would love to see that. It won't happen in this reality because the people running it just don't have as wild ideas as I do. But I would love to see something like that because then what do? You're going to win all the demographics because all the hipsters, they're
That's
getting
right.
Bernie
That's right.
and all the conservatives are going to get Trump. So I mean, it's really a win-win,
And
and you
and
could
you really
crumble the
complicate it
system.
by giving Hillary a cabinet post.
I wouldn't give her a post. I wouldn't even give her a wooden post, let
Right.
alone a cabinet post. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I don't know why not. Like Trump, it's not like he's got a long history of being a Republican anyway.
No.
He voted Democrat for. I mean, he was a registered Democrat for the majority of his life.
I know all the Democrats loved him when he was a Democrat.
Right. Yeah. Look at all the press. Tribe Called Quest, which is one of the biggest prolific rap groups from the 90s, made a song about Donald Trump using media clips saying his name, and it's called The Donald. And it's an amazing song. Like to say that he's racist in the black community, like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's so absurd. Like, look at the facts. Just because the CNN is telling you that nobody ever liked him, like,
Yeah.
that's not close to true. It's
Yeah.
just not. He's a vulgar, like, reality TV star. We knew that, and somehow he still got elected.
Yeah.
But we expected him to be someone different when he got
Right.
into
Right.
office.
Right.
I just don't understand the logic. Like, you knew what you were getting, and now he's here. So let's make the best of it
Yeah.
and move forward. But to hope that the president fails is almost to hope that the country fails.
Oh
And
yeah.
I don't know how I feel about anybody saying that the president shouldn't succeed or that we should, like, whether it's Obama or whoever. I mean, everything's corrupt to a point
Yeah.
in 2020. Let's just make the best of it and start moving forward instead of dwelling on who we don't like, who's in there now.
Yeah. Well, that's being mature though, and in politics there is no maturity.
Right, and that's what we're seeing even during this pandemic when a lot of people are scared. Everyone is scared. A lot
Yep.
of people are sick. A lot of people are their world is upside down,
Yeah.
and yet we're still playing this. He's on the wrong team. He can't do anything right, or she's on the wrong team. What I mean, they're doing it to everybody. It's not just Trump.
Yeah.
They're, whoever gets elected this next round is going to get the same treatment because that's what the media is
Oh yeah.
now.
Now it's become the norm.
Yep, this is
It's
normal, and
not a
that's what
good
people
norm. It's
expect,
become.
and that's what we're going to get from now on. And that's why I don't think you're going to get too good of a candidate to run because they know their life's going to be ruined. They're going to
Yeah.
find every piece of dirt and they're going to destroy
Oh
your
yeah.
life.
Would you run?
I don't know, man. I
I
honestly,
would.
I don't. For one thing, I don't want the seat. I
Yeah.
want to be like, I'd love to advise the seat. I have a
Right.
lot of ideas, and I think that my temperament, I'd keep the person from,
Right.
making any rash decisions. But
Right.
I I have no desire of running for that high of office. I might do like a city council thing at some point,
Yeah.
like make sure my community's taken care of. But until they fix the corruption and honestly the danger, there's too many people that have killed themselves by shooting themselves in the head twice that I
Yeah.
don't want to volunteer myself to be in that position.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, I'm running a risk even having a platform like this, depending on how large it may get, of voicing my,
Right.
dissatisfaction with the status quo and the way the establishment is running things, and that people need more freedom and people need more power. And so that's one of the big premises on this show is eventually if we get to the point where we have like advertisers and there's any sort of revenue, I want to take half of it and let the viewers decide where it goes.
Yeah.
So basically every month we cut it in half, 50 goes to the people. I'll interview one person a week who has like a noteworthy cause or something good that they're doing in the community that maybe should be supported. And hopefully those things are submitted by viewers, by listeners. And then the people can vote at the end of the month, which, presentation, which podcaster that you got to listen to who's running this movement, the person cleaning up the oceans or,
Right.
keeping the salmon alive in the rivers, like who do we want to give that money to? And then let's cut a check and give
Yeah.
them the money. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a small step in the right direction, but eventually, I mean, who's to say? I mean, Joe Rogan's making I think it's like 50,000 an episode, 30,000 an
Wow.
episode, something ridiculous. Even let's say it's 10,000 an episode. That's a whole lot of money
Yeah.
per episode. He's doing 3 a week minimum.
Yeah.
So you take that money, you cut it in half. That's 15,000 if we're on the low side. If it's half of that, so 5 grand an episode, 3 episodes, 15 grand a week
Yeah.
that goes to whatever the people think it should go to. I think that's at least a start of the people starting to take, a little bit of control back and maybe get people more involved. If you know that you can vote on this guy's platform and it's actually going to, result in real money going to things
Yeah.
that you want to happen, maybe you do more research. Maybe you would want to, elect the winning thing. Maybe that would be a sense of pride for you instead of going for likes. Maybe, you could submit the best idea and maybe that's how you get satisfaction or validation from your peers.
Right. Right. Okay. Somehow I screwed this up. I lost you.
Uh-oh, well, I'm here.
I know. There you are.
We can
There
see and hear you. There we
you
go. I'm like,
are.
your glasses got really bright all of a sudden. All right, so one last question. I ask everybody on the podcast and you are no exception, sir. So tomorrow morning you wake up, you check your bank account, and you've got hundreds of billions of dollars. Okay. You call the bank and they're like, nope, it's not a mistake. It's your money. Go nuts. And you're like, well, that's really weird. Maybe this happened to somebody else. So you jump on social media, see if this happened to somebody else too, and you notice you now have hundreds of millions of followers. So overnight, seemingly, you have more money than you could spend, and the ear and the, I guess, influence over people because you can contact hundreds of millions and they'll listen to what you have to say. So overnight, power and influence, the likes of which have never been seen. 6 months from now, after you've fixed the roof, paid off the house, bought the new car, whatever, all the things that everybody puts off because nobody makes enough money to buy all the things that we want to buy or take care of all the things we want to take care of. 6 months from now, 2 years from now, what do you do? What do you put that money and influence, that power and influence toward? What would you want to see change? And what would you put that money toward? Because obviously you'd never have to work. Your family would never have to work. You have more money than anybody could do anything with. So what do you put that toward?
I think I would try to do something to help out mental health issues
It's a great one.
because I just think that so many people are, they're stuck on the streets or other places just because their mental health is off. I think so many times people forget about them, and it just seems to me we could solve a lot of the homeless problems and a lot of minor crime and just make people's lives better if we could look into that a little bit more. And then I'd buy a radio station.
I think I would like to see you with a radio station for sure. So how do we do that? So what would we do? I mean, how would we address the mental health issue? Because it's a big issue. It's one that comes up
Yeah,
on
and
this
there's
podcast a
not one
lot.
single answer, but one thing I would like to do is figure out why certain people do certain things. I mean, we know that there's problems with drug addiction, for example. Why do some people need to have those drugs and some people never even want to get close to them?
Hmm.
We've studied the effects of the drugs a lot of times. Have we ever gotten into the idea of what causes someone to crave something?
The
You know,
psychology of the person who
yeah, and
wants
what
it.
causes people to make bad decisions? Because it seems like some people constantly make bad decisions.
Hmm.
That's the type of research that I think would be interesting to fund. So I'd probably, in doing that, I would probably find, and not have a set outcome like they're doing with global warming. I would actually
Right.
want to fund research that is totally open, like, hey, let's try to find out what's happening here, not
Right.
any predisposed notion, but let's try to figure out what's going on. So I think I'd probably want to use the money to fund research.
I think that's really interesting that you went to a preventative a preventative direction. Like you want to know why they do it so that we can figure out how to stop it, like, how to prevent it,
Yeah.
from happening. That's refreshing. It's a refreshing strategy, one that I absolutely admire because it's very near and dear to me.
Yeah.
Is trying to prevent these things from happening, not throwing, half-ass solutions at a problem. Let's try to figure out how to prevent the problem from happening in the first
And
place.
that's usually what's done is we throw money after the problem rather than preventing the problem.
Right. In most categories,
Yeah.
that's running rampant. Awesome. Well, I think this is great. Thank you
That's
so
fun.
much for coming on, Richard. I hope to do this again soon. We'll definitely touch base once you get that radio station.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, man. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody.